Welcome everyone to Recovery Rockstar. This month's episode I'm really excited about because we are going to be touching on an amazing service that is becoming more and more available called recovery coaching. My name is Melinda White. I am a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that I have not had to use a mood or mind-altering substance since December 28, 2011. That's not my victory. That's the victory of those who have helped me. And I often say it's my personal responsibility to continue paying it forward and helping others. And I don't see it as a responsibility. It's a pleasure and a joy. One of the things that I want to help people be more familiar with is the recovery coaching. The approach that recovery coaches take, it's a combination of having a strength-based approach, which is beautiful because we often hear, especially people struggling, hear about all the ways that they have done wrong and done bad. And the recovery coaching model is to look at those strengths and help a person build on those strengths. So that is one of the reasons it's so effective. Another one is that there's a technique called motivational interviewing, which is extremely effective, and it helps people feel comfortable and really think. Sometimes I don't think we have people do enough thinking, and with social media and technology, it makes it easier to not have to think through things. And yet, for an individual to start learning who they are, what their strengths are, where they need help, then they're able to get to where their goals are. We can't get where we want to go if we don't realize where we are in the moment. So for me, recovery coaching is something extremely dear to my heart. I've gone through the training myself. It was an amazing experience, and I often find even years later that a lot of the things that I learned in that coaching academy, I hear them resonate in my mind when I'm speaking to other people. So I am highlighting Recovery Coach Academy. Also, it's the month of September, which is Recovery Month.
Yay!
So, yay! I really encourage people to look on social media to find what is going on. In Vermont, there are so many different events. There's recovery walks and cookouts and barbecues and trainings, and I really encourage people to look up what the different activities are, and I'll share more about that at the end of the show on some of the websites to be able to look that up. But back to the recovery coaching, the other reason I'm focusing on it is because I have an amazing guest today. My guest's name is Peter Espenshade. He is a recovery coach teacher. He's the trainer for recovery coaching in the state of Vermont. He is also with Friends of Recovery Vermont. So Peter, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so psyched to be here.
I know, I'm stoked
I love this program.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, I'm just really thrilled that you are able to be on the show today to share about, share who you are. Who's Peter? What has your life journey been like? What does recovery mean to you? So really excited to have our guest out there get to hear from you.
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Peter, let's kind of start a little bit from the beginning and tell me a little bit about you as a child. Where did you grow up? What was your life like as a youngster?
Yeah, I grew up in suburban Connecticut, outside of Hartford. Really had just kind of a magical childhood, great family, great home, great parents, beautiful place to live, lots of woods to play in, and it was really, really, really lovely. And I feel like that gave me a real foundation of privilege.
Yes.
And then even with that privilege, I think that just something led me relatively early into a road of substance use, misuse, and then, substance use disorder.
Right. So what did it look like during let's say your school years? What did that look like as far as, did you see substances in the schools back in like junior high and high school? What did that look like?
Oh God, yeah. I was in an affluent suburban high school in the 70s and early 80s. And it was a culture of drug use, and objectively, a culture of drug use is one. Many people from my generation will talk about this. We had a smoking area where one could smoke cigarettes, right? Which I thought was great at the time.
Most of the students probably did.
And then you could go out there, and it was a black market. it was, sort of a Silk Road situation where individuals would have, different illegal substances for use in their cigarette packs or whatever. And I think that the culture and the cultural acceptance of substances and illegal substances is something we don't talk about enough. I certainly saw that there, where it was something that one did, not everybody, but that one could do. And I worry about that now as we look at the epidemic of substance use disorder, that there's a cultural ease into falling into some of these. There's personal responsibility, there's what's going on in the family unit, there's what's going on economically, and then just culturally, like what's accepted and what's not, what's expected and what's not, is something that I think we need to keep our eye on.
Yeah, do you fear what the new norm, as it has been said, is looking like when you see, like the sensitivity towards substance use disorder? When I look at, like, when I was young, the first time I saw substances, it was scary and shocking.
Yes.
And yet when you're in it long enough, it's like, oh yeah, so somebody's, shooting up in the car next to me, no big deal. And that loss of sensitivity makes us almost feel like it's okay and have a new norm, when the reality is a substance-free atmosphere is what we want, right?
I think you're right on. I mean, really, it's that kind of normalization of certain things that just 15 years ago would be shocking.
Yeah.
And when I was a younger man, the idea of using heroin or, some sort of opiate or opioid was beyond the pale. There may have been one or two, incredibly marginalized, dangerous person who claimed to have done it. Right. And we, you and I and others in our field, and not even in our field, in our community, will be walking through neighborhoods, towns, high schools, regardless of where they are on the socioeconomic scale, where it's normative, where it's normal for folks to be using things that are really, really destructive to individuals, to families, to futures, and it's something we just want to keep an eye on. That there's obviously a lot going on with the individual that we want to focus on. We want to focus on one person at a time. That's what the evidence shows, where we can really make a difference. With some of the strength-based approaches you were highlighting in your introduction. And then culturally, we need to kind of figure that out. That's a harder one, is how you shift culture.
It is, and I love how you were saying we got to focus one person at a time. There's a lot of different trainings for people in the field where we're looking at, here's the disease, here's about the disease, and it's like, we're not treating a disease, we're treating people. We're treating the entire person and looking at that lifespan. So for you, when you say that people were kind of in the smoking section, and they had their inventory, and it wasn't really, anything that was too shocking. What did your engagement look like as time went on with having access to substances?
Sure, I think the access was part of it. It may have been a necessary precondition, but we had that cultural norm, and then I think it was really what was going on, in here, not to be too corny, but going on in my heart or in my brain. And I think, like lots of folks, I felt isolated. And one of the paradoxes of self-isolation is you want to do more of it, and you just end up into a spiral. And, quite simply, just like many folks, it was a self-medication.
Yeah.
I think that there are a couple of hypotheses around substance use disorder that really feel real to me. And they're only hypotheses, so we can't test them, but they feel real to me. And I think the self-medication hypothesis is the one where I had, there was something in me that was a little unhappy, that didn't fit in, that was a little weird. And I'm like, boy, I'm going to stomp on that with some self-medication. That's right here,
and it works quick.
Yeah, and it works, and it I think that's sort of the individual aspect. So we talked about the cultural. That was my individual scene, and then I simply had to unwind that. And I say simply, it took years and years and years and years to unwind it. But you know what? We, my family, the people who were helping me did, right? People recover.
Absolutely.
People recover, they just do. And that's why I like programs like this, the work you're doing, the work so many of us are doing. And I think even culturally there, if we're talking about culture shift, we're starting to see a cultural shift where the culture is saying, okay, yeah, people recover.
Yes.
Whereas, again, 15 years ago, if you're like, whoa, we've got a heroin epidemic,
shove it under the rug.
Yeah, like understandably, unless you were Keith Richards, there was no way, and having the resources of Keith Richards, there's no way you were going to recover from that. It was a death sentence. And we don't want to gloss over that tragically it still is for some folks. And that's why what we tout, and what you and I were talking about before, is let's tout the fact that people recover. Let's shout that from the rooftops, and honor those who've passed away. And let's put that positive energy around the fact that people recovered to give hope and cultural direction that this is possible.
Absolutely. And that's, something I know I had mentioned to you, and I tell other people too when they ask about the show. What an amazing blessing it is to have an opportunity to talk about the victories, to talk about the miracles and the blessings, and to be able to show that people recover. Because, we see the news, and it's good to be up to speed on what's going on. And yet I feel like there's not the equality of being able to be up to speed on all of the great stuff going on too. So give me an idea for you. As you started getting to a turning point in your life that you realized that you needed to have a program of recovery, what did that look like? Like, how did you get into recovery?
Oh, God. Everybody's favorite question.
I know, right?
Or certainly at least mine. So in my work, just a very brief preamble, we talk about multiple paths to recovery.
Yes.
And I didn't know that language at that point. I was sort of looking at different options, and I was really blessed to have some people guide me into options that happened to work for me. Right? So I'm a huge fan of AA and the 12-step traditions and NA. I've seen it save a lot of people and work really well for some very close friends. And I could intuit it wasn't going to be a good path for me.
For you, yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
And it was interesting and surprising to see there were these other paths out there. So I think the first path, and also I don't think there's one path for an individual. So there were 2 or 3 paths perhaps that I followed. I think the first was what the writer, the late writer and physician Oliver Sacks calls the grand bargain, which is kind of an evidence-based path to recovery from many things, or to social change, or to personal change, where I looked at my wife, I looked at my 2 very young daughters at the time, and I knew I needed to change or I was going to lose them.
Right.
So I thought I needed to make a bargain, a grand bargain with myself, that I would stop drinking, stop abusing other substances, and in exchange, I would be able to keep my family, right? And that was a really motivator for me. And then a lot of the hard work came through working with a psychiatrist and finding out what was going on underneath that was causing me to self-medicate. If I didn't get what was going on underneath, it wouldn't matter what I was self-medicating with, and that was really joyous. And then so many things just started to blossom out of that. I really got into exercise and diet and reconnecting and, community theater and all of these things that I didn't do because I was so closed in on myself, that those were paths to recovery too. So we think about the path to recovery as being an AA or a this or a that. Those are really important. Those are the foundations of a path. And then all these other things. I mean, just going for a walk every night for, an hour around the block can do more for one's recovery than anything, as we know. So I felt really lucky that after trying and failing, I got just some beautiful people cheering me on and helping me, and People recover. Why it's a
Right.
joy to tout that is because I think we can know it in here.
Absolutely.
We can have that special empathy in here.
And I have to ask you this question. I know for me, when I see people, no matter what, it's like I see that they can recover. We can see the best in them even when they don't portray it necessarily, or they don't see it in themselves. For you, you've had an opportunity to see a lot of people grow and get into recovery. And do you feel like you're able to spot that person who doesn't know yet that they can recover and give them that positive feedback and watch them grow? Like, do you feel like because you're a person in recovery that you've got kind of that, it's almost like there's not words to describe it, but knowing like that's a suffering person, we're going to pull that person out.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel to know that you're part of that solution?
It makes me feel great, obviously, and it took me a long time to figure out what to bring to that table.
Right.
Because I do think that those of us who've had this health condition, or who have this health condition, however you want to phrase it, we do have a certain special empathy and a special radar for folks.
Yeah.
And it's interesting just walking down the street and seeing folks who perhaps could really use just a little bit of help, know? And it took me a long time to figure out what are the best tools to bring to help. And I'm sure I started by being very enthusiastic, as is my want, sharing my own story, as is my want.
Yes.
And it took me a while to learn that doesn't work.
Right.
And that's what the research clearly shows doesn't work. So if I run into somebody who I think might benefit from a little help, I've learned to stick with evidence-based practices. This is a health condition. We all seem to agree on that. We've made great cultural strides with that. Consequently, we can bring evidence-based practices in, right?
Absolutely.
And the best evidence-based practice is something called motivational interviewing. And that's been a real paradigm change in the field of recovery and addiction.
Absolutely.
It really has.
And because you're somebody that is, you've done so much with teaching people about motivational interviewing, you've used it. Can you give, kind of that elevator speech for anybody who's never really heard of it, or they heard of it, but they don't know what it is? What is motivational interviewing?
I refer to it as kind of deep listening. So even though it has the term interviewing in it, when I'm working with somebody, I'm not there interviewing them. I'm there listening.
Yeah.
Right? And I am there to receive not only the grace and this gorgeous act of love and caring of I'm going to listen to you, but it's also a scientific approach to helping people, that when we listen, when we open ourselves up, the individual we're talking to, I can see their shoulders relax, and then they'll begin thinking out loud, and through their thinking out loud, they will come to what's best for them. Yes. And we see it work, you see it work,
Absolutely.
I see it work time and time again. And in situations like this, I always want to emphasize, this is a real paradigm shift. In the old days, we used to be like, I'm going to tell you my recovery story.
Yes.
Right? And that's going to save you. And I get where that's coming from. I really do. We've turned that completely over, where I am going to listen to you. I'm not going to tell you my story. I'm going to be here for you to talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about that. And we say listening is an act of love. And it's also an act of science, of an evidence-based healing. And it just works. And that's what we train people. So we have this thing called the Recovery Coach Training. We certify recovery coaches in the state of Vermont. And what we teach more than anything, 75% of the teaching is how to listen. Yeah. Because we don't live in a culture of listening. Maybe we've never lived in a culture of listening.
I don't know if we ever have. But
right. When's the last time you really felt like you were listened to? And it's something we need to train people to do, and it really, really heals people.
Yeah.
And then there are some basic things that we hang off of that to bolster that. And you've already mentioned the most important, which is a strength-based approach.
That's huge. And I think society in itself tends to not take that strength-based approach. And when you're looking at people who are broken and need help, there's, as a person who went through my own hell, there's nothing anybody could have told me that I didn't already say to myself that was horrible, about how shameful and horrible and guilty I was. So that strength-based approach is almost shocking for somebody who's broken to hear, that despite they're completely busted up on the inside, and you say, well, congratulations, though, that you made it here to even talk to me. Like, that's a big win.
Huge.
And then it's like just those little bits of energy that gets built. And I love how you said my favorite L word, which is love. Mm-hmm. And, love is not, as much as it can be an emotion sometimes to love somebody or something, it's not an emotion as much as it's a decision. And that decision to love people is, because I love people, I'm going to choose to listen to them. So that's the other L word, like that you mentioned, is listening to people and helping them feel validated because you care to listen without inflicting what they feel is your agenda, because I need this person to go get this medication or go to this many sessions or go to this meeting. And it's like, no, I don't know what the answer is for you aside from it's inside you. We're just going to help fish it out.
Exactly.
We're going to fish it out.
I mean, that's it. That's exactly it. It's really, really, really interesting work. And it's part of the training for the recovery workforce, because those of us who are giving back or trying to give back in our own imperfect way by coaching people, we want to go in and be like, tell me about your substance use disorder.
Right.
And again, see where that's coming from. But all that's going to grow in that individual is their focus on their substance use disorder.
Exactly.
Where if we sit back and listen, and if we listen for things that are going well, then we can help that person help those things grow. And when we take what's strong and help it grow. And it's a lesson that we've, explicitly learned from the mentoring movement, which I find super interesting. So the mentoring movement is another evidence-based practice. Is one of the most documented and powerful forms of social change. And it's so similar, I think, to recovery coaching.
What would you say is the difference between mentoring and recovery coaching?
I don't see much difference at all. I really don't. Because if one's ever mentored, So I mentored for a brief period a young man. He was 9 years old. And they train mentors really well. They say, listen, be strength-based, be consistent, right? Don't abandon this poor person. And so in mentoring this young man, beautiful, bright, really great kid, he'd been in I think it was something like 7 new schools over the past 4 years, right? His father was incarcerated. His mother was challenged by different health conditions. His grandmother was challenged by some chronic health conditions. He just hadn't had the chance through the constant moving to have any sort of social network.
Right.
He was completely disconnected.
Yep, alone.
Right? So if I went up to him and was like, hey, I hear you don't have any friends and your dad's in jail and all of that, like I care, I'm here for you. Like, that's not the right thing.
No.
So what they train you in mentoring is listen. And it's not easy, right? I needed to slow down. I needed to listen. I needed to listen over a number of meetings to find out what this beautiful kid loves and what motivates him. And I think in this case, it ended up being cars. It took a lot of listening, right? Wow, let's just go to the car dealer and look at cars. Or, hey, I need to, replace my windshield washer fluid. Will you help me? Right? So you open up the hood of your car and he helps pour it in. Those are the little things that can help him feel good about something that he loves and grows. And there are differences, obviously, but I think the basic approach of listening and providing healthy resources is the way to go.
Yeah. And I love that, like with the, having been to the academy and knowing you and so many other people that are doing, whether it's recovery coaching or mentoring, the amount of love that you can kind of feel from them because it becomes a practice, right? So not only are we using some of these skills with people that we're trying to help and reach and listen to, but it kind of becomes a part of us where in turn, you're a great listener. And it's not because you're trying to recovery coach somebody, it's just because you've learned how to be a great listener. You've learned how to identify strengths. And that's the thing that I love about the continued training that people have opportunities to take, because it's not just about how do we help other people, but in doing so, it strengthens us. Even with a little boy, he's helping you put the windshield washer fluid in. That's an esteemable, like it's giving him esteem. Hey, I can actually help somebody with something. I am good. I am valid. I am worth it. And that's a huge thing that I love seeing people in our recovery community do. I have people come to me that are so broken and I have no self-esteem. That's a big one. And I remember saying that too. I have no self-esteem.
Yeah.
Okay, so go to the grocery store and open the door for people. Well, there's an electronic thing. Well, step on the thing. Open, you know, it's like get outside of yourself. Do esteemable acts. And that esteem builds up. And you see people grow. I know I told you a brief story of a young man that I've just been watching. I'm blown away by this guy he was, homeless and jobless and health is not well and needs treatment, needs recovery. And I want to say it's been maybe 6 to 8 months, back in college, has a car, has a home, like unbelievable stuff. And what is it that helped him? It was people in the recovery community loving on him.
You bet.
Giving strength, giving kind of that we're going to love you till you learn to love yourself kind of, feeling. And what an amazing thing it is.
It's amazing. And it works.
It works. And we see it work all the time.
It work all the time. It's such an exciting field to be working in. And there are people who are just, not to be corny, but who are rock stars.
Yeah.
They're just rock stars with how hard they work, how talented they are, and then what a delight they are to see. It's just amazing. It's just amazing.
And speaking of rock stars, so thank you for being a recovery rock star and coming on the show and sharing about you, sharing about the services, that all of the stuff that is available to people, especially sharing about love and listening. And to wrap up, since we're coming to the end of the show, is there any last little tag that you'd like to be able to say, or any little pebble of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would. I think that we in Vermont have got to kind of look in the mirror and have the courage to be proud of ourselves.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, like we're making a difference. This is not an intractable problem, and everybody in the community is helping us with that. They really are, with people employing people, cheering people on, family members. So let's celebrate that too. Let's not just celebrate these courageous people in recovery, but all of the community members that are cheering us on.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
thank
Peter.
you.
I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate everybody who's watching. Remember, a recovery person is a rock star. A rock star is an empire. An empire is never brought down by outside forces. It's only destroyed by weaknesses from within. So we have to keep ourselves, our spirits, our minds healthy so we can continue to be of service to other people. I encourage anybody to look online at the Vermont Recovery Network website, at your local recovery center websites. It is September Recovery Month, so there are a lot of events going on. I also encourage people to look up Friends of Recovery Vermont. This is Peter. You'll be able to learn more about Peter and his coworkers, and we will see you next month on Recovery Rockstar. Thank you.